right, what's going on, everybody? Episode 2, Cutoffs and Coffee. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Myself, CT, along with Coach James DiBiasio. I'm really stoked about today's episode. We have our first guest on the podcast, Justin Frazier. We'll get into what he does a little more here shortly. But let me just say, I selfishly wanted to have this conversation for a long time, and I like to think that I convinced James to get us in this long-form discussion podcast format just to be able to sit down and talk to Coach Frazier here. So before we get going, want a little word from our sponsor, and then we'll get right into talking about Coach Frazier.
Yep, this podcast brought to you by Underdogg Fitness, the best foam roller out there, the only foam roller that stores all your bands, your mobility work in one spot, keeping that gym bag clean. So we got your bands, we got your rollers. Check us out, underdogfitness.com. That's 2 G's, underdogfitness.com.
And this is the time to be doing it. I never spent any time doing it. I've spent a couple, probably racked up a couple hours over the last couple weeks rolling. I feel a lot better now. So let's get into our guest, Justin Frazier, strength and conditioning coach at Lift Lab in Indianapolis, Indiana. We met years ago. I was in between professional football seasons, found a gym, started training there, and linked up with Justin and ran some of my toughest and most beneficial programs I have ever ran working with him. One thing that really stuck out to me early on was his focus on movement quality. I came from a place where it was just move as much weight as fast as you can, as often as you can. And Justin was the first one to really put me in my place, let me know that I was doing a dumbbell row with my bicep instead of my lats. I was squatting without bracing. I was doing a lot of things that a lot of us novice lifters are doing, and we're not aware that we're doing them. And I will tell you, when I first started at T3 Performance, the first thing that I had all my athletes doing were kettlebell breathing exercises, which is something I never thought I would have anybody do. And I ended up falling in love with it and finding the benefits from it. So here he is, without further ado, Justin Frazier. I would like to call you a movement specialist, but I don't even think that does it justice, what you do. So go ahead, man. How you doing?
Good. It's an honor. I'm honored to be the very first guest. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. Live up to the expectations here.
Selfishly, I wanted to have this conversation, so I'm glad we're able to do it. So where do you think you fit in to the industry as a strength and conditioning coach? Because a lot of people have their ideas of what they do. Where do you fit in specifically?
Honestly, it's kind of hard to say. I started it when I was in college. I studied exercise science, and I wanted to be a college strength and conditioning coach. And I did an internship with the football team at Ball State, and that was a phenomenal experience. And then I did an internship in the private sector as well. And kind of what I got from both of those experiences is that I didn't really want to be in the college industry too much. It was just seemed a little bit too political to me. And I felt like I would never be able to kind of have my own voice and be able to do things the way I truly want to do them. So that's kind of why I pursued the private sector route. And so right now, I don't really know how I think of myself, but really all I'm trying to do is learn as much as possible. And I put out content like you've seen on Instagram and YouTube, and I don't really do that for anybody else other than me. It helps me continue to work through these ideas. So I kind of just do that for myself. So I'm really just trying to learn as much as I can and kind of work through as many ideas as I can and just broaden my understanding as much as I can. And I think that's going to help improve the outcomes I can get with clients. So I don't really know how I see myself, but I kind of work with, right now I work with a lot of kind of on a semi-private basis with a lot of people just looking to get healthy, find more energy throughout the day and get a little bit more lean. And then I also work with Olympic lifters and then some middle school, high school athletes. I'm actually working with 2 high school athletes right now during quarantine. We got a little social distancing, speed and agility thing going on. So that's kind of what I find myself doing.
Yeah, and I wanted to comment on that real quick too, because James is our Olympic lifting guy. He's our speed guy. And I noticed between both of you, when I hear both of you guys speak about it, both of you are not saying this is exactly how to do it. Everybody needs to do it like this. You guys are coaching, you're teaching a certain way. And then it comes down to, is this exactly right? I'm not sure. but we'll figure it out. We'll see what this athlete needs. All athletes are different, right? And you're able to work around that, as opposed to just being married to one movement, opposed to being married to one drill, one exercise. It's so awesome to see that you posted the other day, you were working with some of these guys on acceleration. And I'm paraphrasing, you didn't say it exactly, but you thought, you said, this is something I want to get better at, so I'm working on it. And I love that approach. And maybe, James, that's something you can touch on a little more moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think like for me, I've always had those moments where I like completely learn, or like I completely have to relearn something. And like the first moment of that was when I started at T3 6 years ago, and we had another training director at the time. And like, that's when I really realized I didn't know anything. And so like, I feel like I go through that with speed all the time. Like I'm teaching acceleration different than I've ever taught it. I would say in the last like 3 to 6 months, because like, I don't know if I'm teaching it wrong, or I don't know if I'm teaching it right, and I don't know if there's a better way out there. But I mean, I'm sure that, as trainers, like that's something that we all go through kind of in that reflection phase. What are some things that you found to be like the most effective for your athletes that you've been doing with acceleration, Justin?
So I think when it comes to speed and agility, you have to really simplify things. And I think going back to the basics works the best. So I think honestly, just to get anybody faster, they just need to work on sprinting. Like sprinting is the only thing that's going to replicate the highest velocity output of an individual. So to get faster, you have to work at sprinting. I've also kind of found one of the things that many middle school, high school athletes have trouble with is accelerating. So if you just put them in like just a half kneeling stance and told them to just like sprint 10 yards as fast as they can, one of the things you'll see is that as soon as they push, they'll come straight up and kind of get into a like their full sprint cycle, as opposed to like the angle isn't quite as linear as it should be. So one thing I've been working with is just like 10-yard accelerations for kids to work on that. And I've found that putting them in a half kneeling position with just one knee on the ground and one the other foot, and like a half kneeling, just like you would be listening to a coach talk, and just saying go. And that half kneeling position kind of teaches them to push off that front leg as hard as they can and get kind of more linear as opposed to straight up out of their acceleration. And I've also been doing that from a lateral perspective. So getting there, like if they're turning left or turning this way to accelerate 10 yards, get that inside knee on the ground, because that teaches them to push off the back leg hard and open their hips in the direct or in that position. So most of the times for speed and agility, you need to kind of coach less and put them in a position where the drill kind of gets the outcome you're looking for. So I've found, especially with that lateral half kneeling acceleration, that if you just get them in that position to start and say go, they're really good. That drill automatically takes care of pushing hard off the back leg and creating this kind of optimal angle you want when someone needs to turn and accelerate laterally.
Yeah, and I think that's great too, because just with the eyeball tests, you can tell when a kid like takes some time to get out of that stance. They're definitely lacking in a lot of areas, just from body control. So putting them in that stance is a really good way to kind of show what's why it's taking them so long to get up, and in what direction they're putting their forces into.
Yeah, and that's awesome that Justin made that point, because just a couple of days ago, one thing we said people need to do more, and especially in the situation we're in now, is go outside and sprint, right? Nobody's doing that right now. And then I say nobody, I just see the people around me. I know the people I have conversations with, but what's the first thing that's going to happen when players get back in teams, right? Coaches are going to have them sprint right away. And if they haven't been doing that this whole time, it's going to feel off, and we're going to see a lot more injuries that way. So I appreciate you saying that. We are all on the same page there. I want to transition to movement a little bit, right? So it's such an important topic, and it's something that I don't think any of us are really thinking about on a moment-to-moment basis. Squatting properly, especially breathing properly, things like that. A lot of those things that I learned from you so many years ago. So I just kind of want to get you started. Like, how would you really explain the movement as humans, the development of movement, and then, you know, maybe what is it that we need to start thinking of a little more when it comes to movement as coaches in the strength and conditioning industry?
Okay, so that's kind of a
If that's a
so
lot,
many
yeah,
different
you kind of
ways,
break that
but
down how
I
you would,
think I got
how you
a
would like.
decent starting point here. So, and this is the one thing that probably just in the past year that I've had to really kind of change my mind on and shift gears. So basically, if you study anatomy in school, whether that's high school or college, you learn that you have muscles and you have bones, and then you have muscles that attach to these bones, and then those muscles pull on the bones, and then the bones move, and that's movement. So it's this kind of reductionist lever and pulley system. So basically, if you're like taking water out of a well, that's kind of the lever system. And that's what you're taught in school, how humans move. But they don't really, and they study this on dead people that basically are just muscle and bones is what is the only thing kind of left from them. So, but they don't talk about everything else that we're made of, which is a bunch of fluid, and we're also filled with air. So, and I have to credit, so I just went to Bill Hartman's intensive, and he's kind of the guy that, as far as I know, has kind of created this model and way to look at things. And like, you should follow him on Instagram if you don't. He's got a lot of great content.
Yeah, I definitely will.
But in it, so if you take into account that we're made of more than just muscle and bones, we're full of fluid. Like, most of our body is full of fluid, and then we also have air inside us as well. So that is a better representation of how humans would move. And if you think about it, if we actually did move from the typical lever and pulley system, it would be the most like structurally unstable way to move. Like, we would get broken so fast from trying to lift heavy weight or sprint really fast. It's just a structurally unstable way to move. And so if you actually think about it, we have all this fluid in our body, our bones aren't actually ever touching. There's always fluid like in our joints that are keeping bones from touching each other. And if they do start to touch each other, then you've probably already experienced a problem and are going to the hospital, essentially. So really, we humans move more from compression and expansion. So basically, we compress areas of our body and expand other areas, kind of opposite areas, and that's how we kind of load and propel. So if you kind of think about it as a worm, so a worm kind of compresses and expands, but we also have bones and we're able to stay upright, but we kind of use that same strategy to move. And going back to Bill Hartman, an easy way to kind of look at this tube is, if you guys know those like inflatable tube people when you at the car lots.
Yeah.
So that's
yeah.
So that's kind of our strategy to move, except we're not just air. We also have muscles and bones, and we're full of fluid, and those muscles compress the fluids in the air into other parts of the body, and that's how we move.
Yeah, I mean, we would have a real hard time doing anything rotational if we were just levers and pulleys. We would get torn to pieces, and we would be coming off of our joints all the time. I like the idea of that worm. I like to think about accordions as well. You know, that expansion and being able to
like the slinky.
Yeah.
That's another good representation.
Now, so people who are hearing that, who are overwhelmed, right?
Yes,
I didn't even
completely understand if you're overwhelmed. I'm still overwhelmed.
Right. So where do we start?
Well, I think that kind of is the starting point. And if we use that as the starting point, and that's kind of the beginning of our model, I mean, our clients might not care at all about this, which is perfectly fine, as long as we're getting them to the outcomes they want. But if you have a more kind of conceptually understood model that you're working from, and something that just makes more coherent sense, then you're probably more likely to get to better outcomes with whatever you're trying to get to in regards to movement and performance.
Right. And so I heard you talk the other day about plyometrics and basically reactive time in plyometrics. And it was so interesting to me because you didn't talk about, oh, you need to do a depth drop from above 12 inches, that you need to try to spend as little time on the ground as possible. You talked about how, you know, the fluids in an individual's body could have some negative effect on how quickly they could react off the ground.
Yeah.
Right. Things like that is something that we, at least I don't personally, and if you think something like that about Jen, you can tell me, but that's something I would never think of, but it makes, I mean, perfect sense when you put it in that situation.
Yeah. So the big key is like we hold most of our fluid in our guts. And so I actually I was looking at an MRI today of when you just take a breath in, your diaphragm pushes your guts down towards your pelvis. And you don't ever really feel your guts moving, but you could see from this MRI how much the guts move just from a normal inhale. And it kind of blew my mind. So you have to now think about that from like a normal resting position. And then that's on one end of the spectrum. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you have like very high plyometric activity, like a full-blown sprint, or you have just like a seated box jump or a depth jump. And basically the people that are really good at jumping and like absorbing and like quickly accelerating everything back up, I think those people have kind of a more structure that helps with that in the first place. But basically what they're able to do is kind of accept the guts descending and are able to kind of catch that from their pelvis and then reorient that and accelerate it back up. So if you kind of think about it, if you stood on like a 1 foot box and you just stepped off like a depth drop, basically your body would start going down, but your guts would start moving up. But then when you get to the ground, like when you hit the ground, the guts would kind of slam to your pelvic floor, and it's kind of like a bounce. Like, and then if you can capture that, you get this kind of bouncing thing moving back up.
Sure.
And so your individuals that can't do that, or you might see like their knees cave, and they just kind of, anytime they hit the ground from that, they can't accept that. So the guts just essentially push them straight to the ground, and their knees cave and they can collapse. And you can see this just in people doing like a squat too. Like they might start going, and then basically their pelvic diaphragm can't manage the guts, and then they just kind of collapse all the way down. So that's just a representation or an idea of how you can kind of get a sense of how the guts influence movement. Now you kind of talked about like, what do you kind of do with this information? And I actually just had a conversation this morning, and like, I'm not really sure, to be honest with you. I'm not sure, because I also saw a post yesterday, and it was a guy talking about moving into a cut, decelerating, and then moving out of the cut. And like, so if I moved into a cut, I have to kind of like plant and like absorb and get low. And you can even might see like the ripple on the shirt moving down. And that's kind of exactly what the guts are doing. The guts are moving down, and then you have to be able to kind of like catch them, absorb that, and then reorient them back up in the other direction when you're coming out of the cut. Now, this guy explained all that, and I just kind of thought you could kind of explain really the same phenomenon without even talking about the guts. If you just talked about like the angles of the body, you're kind of getting at the same point. So I'm not sure how much, like, I think it's useful, but I'm not sure how much you need to necessarily talk about that all the time, because especially for like sprint training and speed and agility training, we've kind of always known about, like, say you're doing a depth jump, we've kind of always known that you need to be able to absorb all that force and then accelerate it back up. And the people that can kind of absorb and reaccelerate really fast are typically like your more explosive athletes. And we never really talked about the guts beforehand. So having this like kind of deeper understanding, I'm not necessarily sure what additional stuff it gets you.
Right. But it is super interesting.
to training fasted, right, CT?
Yeah, exactly right.
You don't want a burrito in your tummy while you're trying to do anything explosive.
Have you guys ever trained on like a super full stomach?
I hate it. It's my least
You
favorite
literally
thing, man.
can't do anything.
I can't. I move slow. I can't run. I can't produce force. Yeah, but I mean that makes a ton of sense from a what's going on. I mean, you know, you definitely can speak more on this than I can, but from an ability to brace through that pelvic hip complex, you know, that makes a lot of sense with that being stable for the guts, allowed to be able to rebound off of it, because, you know, our body is moving in the same lines. So, you know, whether we're doing a depth jump to another jump, like being able to use gravity as opposed to try and fight against it the whole time on the way down and on the way up, just roll with it.
Yeah. So basically, and also like your individuals that you've probably seen before, that if they try to decelerate or land from a depth drop, they just collapse. Basically what those people need is they need to unload some of their body weight so they can learn how to kind of catch and rebound the guts. So basically, like you could do like almost like they could even do like an assisted like bunny hop against like holding themselves up against something, or even like people have done like holding they're kind of in bands and they're jumping that way. But basically, for those people, their body gravity plus their body weight is too much, so that you basically just have to unload their body weight.
And you know, that kind of takes me right into my next point, because I did want to ask. Let's just say, you know, this scenario, because this is easy to understand. A lot of people who think they're not flexible will train and then stretch at the end, right? People who, you know, maybe have some issues with breathing and bracing might warm up, train, and then work on some corrective stuff at the end, right? How can we take some of this stuff and mold it into the very early on, you know, first couple movements of our training session, whether it be the warm-ups, you know, kind of brings me back to the breathing and bracing with the kettlebell, you know, because people who do need some help with this moving forward, which I think a lot of us do, which a lot of us need help understanding, and need help kind of working this stuff in. Like, how can we take it from, instead of sitting around at the end doing a static stretch because we want to help mobility, right, to doing something a little more dynamic in the beginning with some breathing and some bracing? And maybe I see you sit in different positions. You go through different ranges of motion. You elevate your heels for some different squats, like kind of all that stuff. Can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think the easiest way to understand this is, so talking about your two strategies to move, you have compression and expansion. So the easiest way to think about this is on like two ends of the spectrum. You have, like, on one end, you have your power lifter that wants to squat 500 plus pounds. And then you have like your other end where someone just wants to, they don't care about anything else other than moving well. So to get really strong and to produce a lot of force output and a lot of velocity, you use a highly compressive strategy. And that compressive strategy helps you lift a lot of weight, but it also steals motion. If you look at any powerlifters, are obviously the strongest people out there. They move like shit. They literally can't move other than a squat, bench, and deadlift. Which for a sport is exactly what you want. You don't want these people to be able to move, because that's what's going to help them lift a lot of weight. So you have to know when you're moving towards that end of the spectrum, you're losing motion the more you go to that end of the spectrum. The more you go away from that end of the spectrum, you're not going to be as strong, but you're probably more likely to gain motion in the process. So it comes down to really who you're training and what are your goals and the outcomes you're looking to achieve. Because if you're a power lifter or Olympic weightlifter and you care so much about like flexibility and mobility, you're not going to get that unless you purposely don't get strong in a way. And going to Olympic lifting, like the overhead squat is not a high mobility drill. Like, to get into an overhead squat or to catch a heavy snatch overhead all the way at the bottom, you're you're compensating in so many places to achieve that, and it's still kind of a high compressive strategy, because if you would basically just flop if you didn't compress, but that is, you're compensating all over the place to get that position. So like, how it basically comes down to a conversation of like, how much do you want to feel good throughout daily life and move well, and how strong do you want to get? So, and if you're working with like an athlete that obviously they need to move well enough to like pitch, or they need to move well enough to run fast, then you kind of have to, I think, play with both ends of the spectrum. Because obviously, like, you can't take a pitcher and just compress them super hard, because they need some of that movement to generate like this crazy arm whip. So I think really the conversation you have to have with yourself, with your clients, is what are the goals and outcomes you want to achieve. So that's kind of what I have to say about that. Does that make sense? So I don't really have necessarily any like, these are some things you should be doing in your warm up or after your training session. Because if I said that, I think I'd be speaking to like kind of a one size fits all approach. And it kind of really depends on, like, everyone's different and everyone has different goals. So it comes down to like, what are you trying to achieve?
I really like move well enough to be able to do something. I think that, a lot of times athletes get lost in their own routine, and their own routine might have focused so much on a weak point a year ago that they've already worked through, and they're still focused. I'll use a baseball player. I work with an extremely explosive pitcher, and he can squat over 4, he can deadlift whatever he wants. He's a D2 righty, and he throws hard, and he made a big velo jump with all the strength training through those strength goals. But he's strong enough. He moves well enough in the weight room. His attention needs to be spent in other areas to allow him to move better like a pitcher. But he was so caught up because of how much growth he got from the weight room, and it directly showed up in his pitching because it was very linear, because he was, no training, and all of a sudden we're doing a strength program and you're getting crazy gains and you're seeing him on the mound right away. You think that all you have to do is keep working hard like this in the weight room to keep making those linear gains on the mound, and it doesn't always work like that.
So did that kid just want to continue to go crazy on the strength training?
Yeah, and he still does.
Which, if you're a pitcher and you're squatting over 4, like, probably good enough, to be honest with you. Like,
And that's a conversation we have with him, frequently. And he's even talked about like leaving the gym to go find other places to train. And, we love this kid, and we kind of just said, hey man, if you feel like that's best, go do it. But this is the only place I would go to. And we pointed him to Driveline, just because they have some serious biomechanic tools out there. But, that's, what we felt like. He moved well enough in the weight room, man. We don't need to spend 4 days a week, 2-hour sessions anymore. You got it.
Yeah. You got that figured out. And so speaking, I didn't speak about this enough early on, because I think it kind of sets a tone as, just people who are listening to certain coaches talk about certain things. Right. And so now we've talked about movement a little bit. We're also, gotten into the strength and conditioning world just a little bit. You've had some success now lifting some weight over your head. You've competed in powerlifting, competed in weightlifting, put up some pretty serious numbers. What are your top numbers? If you can think about those, because they're all pretty impressive.
So for powerlifting, I've squatted 512, bench pressed 145 kilos, I believe, which is 325, and that's in competition, so paused, and then deadlifted. My best in competition is like 567, I think. And in the gym, I think I've pulled like 572, but it was a little sketchy at the top. And then weightlifting, best snatch is 120, so 264. And then best clean and jerk is 150, which is 330.
Damn.
So,
What weight class do you sit around?
So for powerlifting, I was competing as a 94, weighing about 90 kilos.
Okay.
Then I haven't competed in Olympic lifting in probably over 2 years, I want to say. So I'll be probably an 89 kilo lifter next time I compete.
Any interest in that? I know you had a post the other day that I just had to pull up, made me laugh. You said, I'm on a no competition prep program.
Yeah. So,
Right.
Pretty well.
so the original goal this year was to compete anytime from like April through May, just to qualify for the AO3 in Vegas and then go there and compete. So that was the goal. And obviously that was before Corona time. So
Sure.
the goal still is that, depending on, I'm not sure what the kind of the external circumstances are going to be. But yeah, the goal is to compete relatively soon to get kind of the first competition out of the way. But basically I'm on a no competition prep program because like that was just the next cycle that was written for me. And even though I'm probably not going to compete right afterwards, it's probably good for me to, I've had like 3 months of weightlifting behind me, or like solid weightlifting training. So like, I think it's probably good that I do a competition prep program anyways, just kind of see.
And I love that you're able to transition and pivot your training. That's something that James and I talk about all the time. Is we have a lot of lifters who just want to weightlift. We've got we have powerlifters who just want to powerlift, and we keep saying that you try different things and you lift different ways. It will make you better. I remember early on when we met, you were, I believe, strictly Olympic weightlifting, then transitioned into powerlifting. Did you see the benefits when you came back to weightlifting after just getting like very strong?
Yeah, I don't. Yes, I did. Cool. I snapped like after I was like a month and a half, 2 months from switching from powerlifting solely into weightlifting, and I hit 2 PRs, like 120 and 150. And I don't know if that was from all the strength I've gained. I think that's probably a little bit of a part, or just being so fresh to the Olympic lifts that my body wasn't beaten down from them too much. So I think it's kind of those two things together, but it's hard to know for sure. I definitely do think the strength gains have like helped.
Yeah, and where do you stand on that, James? Because you have mentioned before you usually feel better after taking time off of weightlifting, right?
Yeah, and I don't want to it's never time off of weightlifting. I think that like training, like let's say I would even like if I was going to do a powerlifting meet, I would still be power cleaning and I would still be power snatching. I just like the emphasis and how you approach the bar is a little different, and I think that's what you need time off of is time off of approaching the bar with the intent of like the only two things I care about is my clean and jerk and my snatch, and like that beats me up more than anything else. Whereas like if I'm training like a football player and doing speed and doing all of the stuff that we run through when we train with our kids, we're 45-50 minutes and we're like into a session and we're pretty fatigued at that point, yet we're still within the 80 to 90% range of what we're lifting competitively. But it never feels like it just because there's not that tied to competition. There's not the expectation that I have to do these lifts or that I have to hit these weights on these days. I think that's the thing that I need to break from the most, just that kind of monotonous, put a weight on the bar. There's a certain number that needs to be on the bar. I need to be moving a certain way. On Saturdays, I need to be maxing out. And if it doesn't go so well, then that's all you're thinking about. Whereas when we're training like football players with those groups and with our athletes, that's just fun.
Right. Yeah. And so, I could talk to you guys forever about this. I do want to start to transition, kind of start wrapping this up a little bit. And we'll push towards the end, Justin, some people towards your social media. Your Twitter's awesome, dude. Instagram's awesome. I got it all pulled up right here. But I will ask real quick, and I'm sure people will wonder as soon as they pop on there, your profile picture is you on your wedding day, I believe, with a snake around your neck.
Yeah.
Can you explain that just a little bit?
Yeah. So I got married in Fountain Square. It's kind of like this little hipster area of town, kind of right outside of downtown Indy. But so we, like the groomsmen, we all got dressed and whatnot. And then we started taking pictures, and we were taking pictures inside, and then we came outside to take pictures. And that day they had like this kind of like small business setup where there's a few small businesses with booths out, and one ended up being, I don't even know exactly what their business was, but this guy had like a snake like around his neck the entire day. So it had something to do with animals. And one of my groomsmen, like our photographer, was getting ready to take pictures with us, or I think we started taking pictures outside already. And one of my good buddies was like, "Hey, can I get a picture with the snake?" And the guy was like, "Yeah." And the photographer's like, "Well, why don't you let the groom get a picture with the snake?" So I'm just sitting there with like, I was kind of freaked out. I was like, "Okay, just put it around me and like hurry up and take a picture."
You don't see that in the picture. You do a good job of holding it together in the picture, but I know I would be.
Like, I'm not really controlling the snake. It's just like on me. And then I'm just like, okay, hurry up and take the picture. And then that was essentially it.
Oh, yeah. Because that's funny.
Like, how many people have on their wedding day got a picture with a snake? So I think it's kind of unique.
More people probably have pictures with tigers on their wedding day than snakes.
Right now.
Yeah. You ain't lying there. So I'll ask one more question before we wrap up, and maybe talk about one of the most important things of the day, something we're all passionate about, as well as strength and conditioning. But so if there's one thing, and I know we talked, Justin, a little bit about how we don't want to be too far towards one spectrum. We don't want to be too specific. Maybe don't want to be too general, trying to find the sweet spot. Are there a couple things that people could take away from the conversation and start doing today that they could get some benefit from, as far as things that you do there that are a little different than they might be doing on everyday basis? And again, you have a lot of stuff on social media, and we will push people towards there. And I try all the stuff you did. I actually was out doing what I have today. I had my heels elevated. I was holding a slam ball, and I was going down like a 6 or 7 count, nice and slow, trying to breathe through my diaphragm and trying to focus on all the things that I see from your social media. I was just doing that, a couple hours ago outside. Is there something that you think people could take and start doing right away that they would see a benefit from?
Well, I think the biggest thing is knowing, like, you have to know what your goals are, and you have to know whatever you're reaching for and striving towards, there's probably some negative secondary consequences. Like going back to your power lifter, which is just the easiest example. To get really strong, you're going to lose motion, and therefore probably going to hurt more than your average individual. I would say, as far as like if you're just an average, it's kind of hard to say. Let me also say this: like if you're, I don't know what kind of people are going to be listening to this.
Sure.
I would say, like, one thing that I've changed my mind on, like, if training middle school, high school athletes, is I don't know if I'm going to actually back squat them anymore. Like, I think a safety squat bar might be a good option, but especially like baseball kids, like there's just so much compression on a back squat that you're probably stealing some motion from them that they probably need. But these people still need to get strong. They still need to gain some muscle, and because they still need to create a lot of force and learn how to kind of utilize that force in the most efficient manner. I honestly don't know if I can say like there's one or a few things people can take away with. I would say also that I've kind of, most people, unless you're like a strength athlete, I typically squat everyone with their heels elevated now. Unless I'm coaching like a large group and we don't have enough heel elevations for everyone.
Sure.
I just think it kind of teaches people that haven't squatted a lot in their life. It teaches them to kind of get into a much better squat position. I've also utilized like tempos a lot more than I ever have.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just kind of teach movement and kind of help someone establish how to do a movement faster than they otherwise would. But I honestly don't know if there's anything I can just like straight up give that's going to help everybody, because everyone's going to be different.
No, I love that. Slow it down to speed it up. That's a really good thing to take away. That's huge.
Yeah, because that is something you notice right away with people with bad movement patterns, right? Is they're just going through, just doing things as fast as they can, right? And
you don't know where you're going, you can't get there fast.
Yeah.
Right.
Because
Amen
your
to that.
body just wants to be like, is just striving towards energy efficiency, which is why movement is typically sloppy right away, because it's the most energy efficient manner they can move. Like, it's the most energy efficient movement for them until you actually have to sit there and coach them and take them through. And then you'll see sometimes with somebody, just changing the movement gets them like sweating so much more and huffing and puffing so much more, because they like have to actually work hard to achieve like that specific movement outcome.
Yeah. That's funny. I imagine we all have specific people we think about, and that comes to mind when you talk about that. Okay. So I want to wrap up real quick, and I keep bringing up the podcast is called Cutoffs and Coffee. James and I are big fans of caffeine, big fans of coffee. I feel like I do such a disservice to coffee, and I'm so disrespectful to coffee when I just pop it in a Keurig, or I just get some cold brew and pour it over. And I feel so bad about it, but I just don't understand the process enough. And I know that you've done Justin coffee reviews, and you've got all your things on your social media about it. You said the other day, I think maybe it was a hashtag you said, and you just said, don't drink Folgers.
Oh yeah, that's a while ago.
Yeah, and I was thinking, what have I done? What? I can't believe how disrespectful I am by just drinking out of a K-cup. So what is your favorite, maybe one or two favorite types of coffee, and your favorite way to drink them?
So I definitely think, so Caveman Coffee has some really good coffee. They have a saber tooth roast that's a dark roast that has the smoky flavor. That's really good. My wife doesn't like it because she thinks it tastes like cigarettes, but it's got this kind of like smoky campfire flavor. I'm also a big fan of, it's called Dark Matter Coffee. So those two coffee companies right away are probably, as far as I've experienced, are probably two of the best coffee companies that I think makes the best coffee. Dark Matter is also, they're originally located out of Chicago. So if you're ever in Chicago, you can actually, there's like 3 or 4 different locations, and you can go to the actual original location. But when we were there in October, we went, it wasn't the original location, but one of the locations had 2 different types of nitro cold brew, and they were both so damn good. So good.
Oh yeah.
So, but those are probably the 2 I would say.
Yeah, because I was remember in the morning.
I've only had Starbucks' nitro brew, and I feel embarrassed saying that.
Well, I will say theirs is actually pretty good. Their nitro cold brew is actually pretty good. It's got like a nice smooth flavor.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Well, I always remember when I was in there training in the mornings, when you were at the gym, you always had that nice tall cup of Joe, which I always appreciated, I always respected, because you could not be found without that in your hand.
Pretty much.
Yeah, and I always appreciated that. All right, man. Well, I think this is awesome. Where can people find you? I know I have you follow you on all the social mediums. I know you're pretty active on Instagram, pretty active on Twitter.
I'm probably most active on Instagram. I don't even know what my handle is. It's just Justin_Frazier 05, Frazier. And then Facebook, Justin Frazier. And then Twitter is, I don't really use Twitter. I basically only tweet now just to screenshot it and put it on Instagram. But my Twitter is jfrage_05. And then also my YouTube is just Justin Frazier. But you can, if you follow me on Instagram, you can pretty much find where all my other stuff is.
I was going to say, I do see you have a link to your your YouTube channel on there. Yeah, and I really push people. I really push people towards your social media, man. It's awesome. I get excited every time I see something on there. Just again, because it's just people aren't talking about the stuff you're talking about, and James and I feel the same way about a lot of the stuff we're doing. And it's just good to see that there are still people out there who are kind of pushing the needle, who are trying new things, who are not afraid to go out there and speak against what some people are talking about. And you're doing all that. And I really appreciate that. And keep doing your thing. Keep putting out great content. Again, it's very much appreciated.
Too,
What's that?
That's a big thing. Walking the walk. You still lift heavy. You still get after it. I think that You know, from an athlete's perspective, I know how much kids pay more attention to you when you can do it too. And I know, you know, I've been following you since CT, you know, showed me your page before we met. And, you know, I think that's just a big thing that we respect, you know, is your ability to walk the walk, you know, not only putting out all the good information, but also following up on it with your actions.
Yeah. I've always been a competitor, so I've just kind of figured like weightlifting and powerlifting have kind of been my outlets post athletic career. And I just kind of figured I'll probably always compete in something. So it kind of gives me some drive to keep it going.
Right. Gives you some drive and motivation. But like you said, you're on a no competition prep, right?
Body's feeling a little rough these days, but
You're doing it right.
Yeah, right. Well, we now have the time to recover. Justin, anything else, man? Anything else from me? Anything else you didn't hit on that you'd like to?
I don't think so. It's been an honor to be your first guest. This was fun. Definitely could have gone for probably another hour for sure.
Again, you know, and that's something I'll keep it in James's ear. Would love to have you on because again, there was a ton of stuff on my notes here that we didn't hit on.
I would love to come back and dive into Olympic lifting in depth. And we could fill a whole ton of time with that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yep. Yeah, we've already started talking about coaches we want to have on to talk Olympic weightlifting, and you would be another perfect one to be able to talk about that.
Yeah. Now, I wish you guys success doing this. Hope you guys continue to do it.
Yeah, thank you, man. You know, it's just a couple of bros who want to get together and talk about, you know, pump stuff and helping people out.
Yeah, and I'm sure most people are most of the time are more than willing to give you their time.
So we'll see. I know you started one
kind of
a little bit ago. Have you been pursuing that a little more? Again, I know
I kind of just merged it into just kind of creating videos myself. It kind of became hard to get a lot of people on. And so in the future it'll still probably pick up, but it's not like my main focus right now.
Cool. Well, again, thank you so much for being on, man. We'll have you on again. We'll talk Olympic weightlifting. Tell your wife I said hello. Hope everything's going well back at home, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you, Justin. Thanks so much. Everybody listening, thank you for listening. We will send you to Justin's all his social media. You got to check that out, man. T3 Performance. Check us out. Can't wait to be back in the gym. Cutoffs and Coffee, episode 2. Thank you all for listening.